You're listening to Techsuite for the C-Suite, where we bridge the gap between technology and executives. Awesome. Glad to have you, Flynn. How are you?
Doing good, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. You just basically were like, oh, yeah, cool, let's hop on after I started the whole thing and talking to people on Farcaster, which is kind of also a cool thing that came up the last couple of talks as well, where Farcaster seems to be the one place to hang out if you want to learn as well, just to plug it right away. So we'll have your
Yeah,
Farcaster in the show notes as well.
yeah.
But before we dive in, how did you actually get into the whole blockchain space? How did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, no, yeah. So I've been a senior software engineer at Amazon for the last 6 years of my career so far. I've been in software development for the last 15 years or so. So I did a computer science degree in Australia and then ended up moving overseas to work for an international company and then found myself at Amazon building all sorts of really interesting pieces of technology for all sorts of customers all over the world. And part of that
Yep.
aligns with blockchain. So what, of course, Amazon build as well is they have their own Amazon managed blockchain service, which is built on top of something called IBM's Hyperledger Fabric. It's a private blockchain.
Yep.
So I've done a lot of work with that, and then sort of found myself venturing into more of the public blockchain space, and took all the expertise that I had in working for Amazon or for AWS and that cloud space, and merged that into what can be done in the Web3 and the blockchain space. And from that, I've started a business that's focused around sort of bridging the Web2 to Web3 interface to make sure that that's a seamless transition for developers. And we build a SaaS product. We have two SaaS products that sort of focus on lowering the barrier of entry and making it easy for folks to get on board and develop great products for their customers.
That's awesome. I'm typically the one to hate on all the AWS private things because of ideology. Like I
Yeah.
get the privacy part, and I have people I talk to in the medical field
Mhm.
where it's oh, you need the privacy to actually do anything on the medical front, and I do
Mhm.
realize the need for it. Though I just hope ZK and the privacy tech will move so fast
Yep.
that at that point that the whole medical industry will get there, we will not need any private blockchains, just because of ideology and people being able to just interact with anything. So I'm,
Yeah.
I'm happy for you to fill us in on why private blockchains are
Yeah,
cool
definitely.
later
We
on.
can we can talk all about that. No, I think it's a
Well,
really interesting topic, and I think to your point on ZK, I do believe that also, and I do think we will get to that point.
yeah.
But the interface right now is nowhere near ready for
Oh
that level
no.
of consumption.
No, 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 no. Like even for building in ZK as well,
Yeah,
it's more research right now than blockchain
exactly.
even is. So while the blockchain field feels like a research project still,
Hmm.
even though like some points have huge adoption, for example,
Hmm.
the financial part as well, but the whole outside part of that, like for example in gaming, they struggle with the scale
Hmm.
of things, how much transactions they need to post. Like, say you have a million gamers and they all move at like say 60 FPS, which is considered to be like a smooth gaming experience over the network.
Hmm.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
getting into the oh now you need 60 times a million, 60 million transactions per second.
No, I think it's
Not there yet.
you know in the gaming industry, and of course in finance and in medical and all the other industries that sort of are emerging and starting to sort of poke the idea of blockchain.
Yep.
I don't really ever see it being anything other than a hybrid solution where you sort of where you basically have off-chain co-processing, right? You're basically able
Yep.
to sort of pass along an event to an off-chain co-processor that writes an optional proof back to some sort of other ledger of some sort. And I said the word
Yep.
optional there. I think that not everything, and I think this is something that we've sort of come to build up in a lot of the ZK research and in that space where, it's hearsay if someone says, oh, you don't really need a proof for that. No one really so people are sort of saying, oh no, you need a proof for everything. At the end of the day, if there's a e-commerce site or a hospital, for example, and
Yep.
their software or application doesn't work, they're going to lose all their trust, and their trust is worth more than proving something on chain to their patients or to their customers. So
Yep.
that is so critical for them that they can't afford to have their system or application not work, and therefore that's more important than writing a proof in some concepts.
Oh,
Um,
though
yeah.
working may actually be facilitated by having a proof that it works. So
Sure, yeah,
that's
yeah. I mean, it could
also
be,
an
it could
interesting
be,
point,
but I
right?
think that at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the 70-year-old patient who logs in and sees their record being them and
Yeah,
being valid
yeah,
to them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but in the gaming space, I think that's the perfect way to discuss the hybrid
Hmm.
point, because how I see gaming is you will have a great game,
Hmm.
and you will want to expand that gaming ecosystem into
Hmm.
other games,
Hmm.
while making that as easy as possible. So what you will do is you will have your game and say at the end of each game, your server will commit a proof of that
Hmm.
game to the blockchain.
Yep.
That, for example, Flynn and I top fragged in Counter Strike. We both had 30 kills in 20
Hmm.
rounds because we're
Nice.
the absolute top Gs in Counter Strike. And we just annihilated the enemy team so well that they didn't even get a single round on us. So we want that posted on chain. It will be posted on chain. If we lose, that will be posted as well. So we have a public kind of record system, and all the rankings are public. So if another game were to be a shooter and they could just instantly leverage the Counter Strike system,
Yep.
why would Valve do that? Well, they would like to do that because any shooter using the Counter Strike system is free marketing for them and their scoring, because that game can't alter the Counter Strike system, but it can use it to seed users initially and maybe bootstrap their ranking.
Hmm.
While if you had a full open ranking, you could also just pull all the Counter Strike rankings and the other shooters as well to have one general shooter ranking, which you couldn't do off blockchain right now because you simply don't have access to the data. So I think that's one of the interesting points. Also, gaming items being stored and exchanged on chain because that's interoperable and anyone can join and use it, while the actual games themselves will be kind of locked down, like the Fortnite ecosystem with the items is in the Counter
Yeah.
Strike as well.
No, I think that checks out for sure. And I think technologically speaking, I think that, as you mentioned, like there's checkpoints very similar to how like a side chain works, right? Writes like checkpoints of state into an L1 or something like that. I think that a Counter Strike round could be a checkpoint where essentially a hash
Yep,
of even the mechanisms of movement and the
yep,
firing and everything that happened could be rolled up into a hash and committed per round. So I think technologically speaking, I think that checks out.
yep,
Um, but I think that more so from a business perspective, the perception of the association with blockchain is going to cause companies such as Valve, or like in this case,
yep,
to probably not want to really do that unless there's some large scale monetization incentive for them. And then that's going to, of course, push them into their own private implementation of something to sort of keep that sort of within their own bounds and ecosystem. But that's my sort of a view on
yep.
it. That's what I see sort of businesses leaning towards, is saying like, well, it's my IP. I don't want to lose, Counter Strike IP or Dota IP or
Yeah, and,
whatever
and
it
and
might be.
and I think that's what we have to figure out in the public systems
Yeah.
domain, how that interoperability can also work IP and money wise,
Hmm.
so that those companies will then join. Because if it's more interoperable and open, with the examples I gave earlier, we will actually have a cool new shooter coming out where you have your Counter Strike skins and rating. Maybe then, if that shooter uses that, you would have to license with Valve. They would have to give you a key to decrypt the on-chain assets, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
And if that key is shared and used by another system or running out around in the dark web, then there's a contractual
Yeah.
penalty. Like you could kind of mix the contract world and the technical ability and openness
Yeah.
to I think get that to work really
Yeah,
well.
yeah, it's an interesting piece. I mean, the reality as well, of course, that these assets are not stored on chain. The token representation of the asset
Yeah,
visually, which is what the gamers care
yeah,
about, is
yeah,
stored on chain. The token representation, but of course, the visual asset would be owned by Valve. So
yeah,
you'd have some
yeah.
reference in a contract pointing to something that Valve owns anyway. So
Well,
at
it
the end of the
depends.
day,
Depends. You could store it on. You could store the actual version, the current version on Arweave as like a 3D model or so for people to
sure,
use. But
yeah,
then Valve would give out the original 3D model, and then that would be open. And we know what ends up happening if something is open, because nobody in the internet cares about the actual copyright
yeah,
unless it's
exactly.
monetized. But then it will just be a free blockchain game.
Exactly. There's solutions for it as well. But again,
Yeah,
it's a company risk tolerance, because, if we start
yeah,
saying, oh, we can add in technology A or company B like Arweave, that's more risk that Valve take on into the ecosystem of the whole thing.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
a negative for them.
No, I get why they're not doing it. I think that's just
Mm.
the frame. If I were building a game
Yeah.
today, that is the frame that I would be building towards and with,
Yeah.
so that if that ends up happening, and I'd say mindset wise from how the gamers think today and how anti NFT blockchain they are.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think we're 10 years away because we need
Yeah.
more mainstream non gamer things to happen for them to shift their mind, or to have awesome games that are just enabled by blockchain where we don't talk about blockchain,
Mm,
for
mm.
them to be like, okay, now it would actually be cool if they
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah, 100%
Uh,
agree. 100% agree. And I think one of the biggest things we can see here, and if we draw some parallels back to games that we've seen have huge success over the last 10, 20 years, like Counter-Strike, for example, is
yeah,
a good example. I mean, that was built up really without a large VC backing or anything, right? I mean, if you go back to the very early days, that was put together through a
there was
passion
no
project.
VC backing.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Just to explain the Counter Strike story, to anyone not familiar, Counter Strike itself launched as a modification, like as a mod, to Half Life, which was a
Yeah.
game developed by Valve. Valve was, I'd say, a little bit funded by Gabe Newell and his
Mm,
co-founder having money from Microsoft because they were early Microsoft execs. Though they had a little bit of their own money and they got a little bit of money from the studio, but there's no large VC backing in building Half-Life. And the Counter-Strike team itself was just some passion project building a shooter into Half-Life. That's also one thing why I advocate for the openness and just to build a game that is interoperable,
mm.
because then you can actually get those kind of mods for your game.
Yeah.
Look at
Yeah.
Minecraft. Like Minecraft is also played just as it is, but the whole ecosystem of Minecraft also is a lot about modding,
Yeah.
and that's also why it's thriving. And still, you have to buy the game, so you still get the money in that sense if you care about the economics.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Definitely.
and
No,
and
you're
then
right.
Counter Strike from that got so
Yeah.
popular that Valve just bought out the team.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that's what I was going to get to. And if I look at the games, sort of that are popping up these days, it's a large financial incentive, right? You see 50 million thrown in by A16Z or
Yeah,
Paradigm or, and I think until we stop seeing so much of that, which is sort of a whole conversation in itself, if we ever will, then we'll stop seeing the things that cause, because if
yeah,
you draw a line here to say modern mainstream gamers, what do they view? Well, they probably go on Twitch and watch Asmongold, for example, right? Like they get
yep,
influenced by
yep,
the
yep, yep.
industry leaders in this space who drive sort of a consensus mechanism above about their chat,
The
about what
social
they're into.
consensus, yes.
Exactly, social consensus, yeah. And that social consensus now is so strong, and it's, I think, partly because of this large funding that happens in play, which of course incentivizes the company to create tokens and assets to pay back, of course, that money. And that's I think if we do see a shift back into sort of a raw, the initial Half-Life modding days, or the Dota, of course, coming from Warcraft as well, in that sense, right? Like we will see probably that level of passion built into the games again.
Yeah,
So,
it's still possible. Like if you look at Only Up,
mhm.
that's kind of the recent story of a game just taking off being that way.
Right.
Mobile games as well, you can have some, but just the general amount of content out there and the way that you need to market
Yeah.
with the current 3D and AAA games being so time intense that makes them money intense, just means that the VC model makes sense even for developers to take on, which is,
Yeah.
phrase it how you want. I'm not going to comment on, with a personal opinion on that. I'd rather have you explain how blockchain itself,
Mm.
like how we would actually explain blockchain to an executive who has
Mm.
basically next to no prior knowledge about that field.
Yeah, I think really it would be always with a little bit of context about where that executive works, what vertical they work in, and why it's relevant to even explain it to them, right? If they're an executive in the automotive space, it's going to be very different to an executive, in the medical space, for example. But I think sort of always drawing a parallel back to sort of giving a high level overview of a ledger and just making sure that they understand the idea of a decentralized ledger that promotes transparency and trustlessness systems. Um, I think that definition can be useful for them to understand the constructs, but I don't think it really ties to their business and why it's important for their customers. So, like, of course, being at Amazon for so long, everything I'm thinking of always is like, how is this useful for the customer? Like working backwards from the customer is one of the built-in ethos is sort of in everything we do. So it's very much like if I'm explaining it to an executive, I'm always going to say, who are your customers, right? And like, what's the important part for them that they would need to know so that I can explain this to you so that you can understand it from their perspective, right? Not like if I just talk about, the different features or aspects of the technology that might not help them at all. So, yeah.
How would you actually then go and say the benefit of the customer in blockchain generally is? How would you complete that sentence?
Um, I think it would really be depending on the application that's being used, right, as a backing, because of course you'd be building an application and you say, hey, this specific application in our business. So it'd be, well, tell me about the application you're building or that you want to build, right? Like what is it that your customers need right now? Oh, they might need a store to help them purchase, solar panels or something like that, for example, right? Like that's what we
Yeah.
sell. We sell solar panels, for example. Okay, there's use cases there where potentially that technology could come in to benefit the sales workflow of solar panels. Again, it would be like, be very tailored to the sort of specific industry or application they want to build. Because at the end of the day, some execs might only need to think of it as sort of a decentralized storage layer or even a database. And you can start drawing parallels to traditional databases. And then you could say, also draw parallels to decentralization and what that can mean across certain aspects in business as well. So again, I hate saying it depends over and over again, but a lot of the time that's
No,
the answer. We
it
do.
does. It does. I just ask it generally because
Yeah.
some people will just answer with their background, give their explanation instead of
Hmm.
saying general as well, and then you actually get the specific examples.
Yeah.
Though one thing about the database that I always found fascinating is when I configured my AWS
Hmm.
back like 2 or 3 years ago when I worked with a company that had AWS, they would have me go back to US East
Hmm.
as the region where I have to do my account configuration.
Sure.
Well, then I have to go back to the Frankfurt region,
Hmm.
German
Yeah.
customer, German servers,
Yeah.
um, to then actually configure the EC2 instances, like all the different
Yeah.
AWS stuff that is specific to that customer and their environment. So my account config, where I have
Hmm.
to deploy keys, for example, to actually
Mm.
work with AWS, is in US East, and then I
Right.
have to click change region to go
Yeah.
back to Frankfurt. I think nowadays it's still it got abstracted away. Likely still
Okay.
US East in the background, but I just don't have to change region manually anymore for that because it just probably routes me to that region. But I always thought when I started to get blockchain more and more, I was like, if you just had a blockchain running in each of your AWS data centers that kept a record of everyone's settings, could be a private chain, probably is because of privacy reasons,
Yeah.
you would have global consensus where I don't have to go to US East anymore.
Well, I mean, definitely, there's many reasons why why they wouldn't want to do that. Of course, for many different reasons. But we can go into some of those. But yeah, of course. No, I think a lot of that has changed these days. With one of the most amazing things in the Web 2 space around infrastructure, and I think this is actually going to be something that we'll see in Web 3 and in the blockchain space over the next couple of years that no one's really talking about yet, is infrastructure as code. So,
Yep.
building anything in the traditional sense, you basically write your resources for a database, for a CDN, for a network, for a security group, all as code. You can do that in Go or TypeScript or Python or whatever you like, and it creates and provisions those resources. So, of course, today, if you want to go and spin up a node on Infura or Alchemy or something like that, right? I mean, that's an infrastructure resource that exists in the Web3 space, but it's a very manual process that doesn't have a lot of automation and configurability and reproducibility built into it. So I think we'll see a lot more, especially as we get more resource identities, right? Like decentralized CDNs and decentralized storage layers and so on that pop up. Like, I mean, having a unified configuration language that you can create an Arweave like setup or IPFS or a node or all these other pieces, that's fantastic, and that really should exist. So hopefully someone's building that.
Yeah, I'm just taking that down as an idea to ask around, like who is building the give me an
Yeah.
Arweave gateway that
Yep.
also runs a node as code, so that I can say, oh, I just define that node, and
Yep.
in the backend it goes to AWS, creates an EC2 that is like for the non-Amazon people, that is a computer. An EC2 is just a computer, so it creates a computer for me. That computer is running my node,
Mhm.
so my well part of the Arweave network where the storage is on, so it configures the storage in AWS as well.
Yeah.
And it also is running the software that I can ping to actually get access to the Arweave network, where I am part of the network in my AWS environment as well. So I have a current version close to me, so I have low latency. So that way, I get the current state of the network at next to no latency because it is in my own AWS environment and not
Mhm.
just some other companies.
Yeah.
I also have the storage attached as well because that is what Arweave needs to operate, as Arweave is a decentralized storage solution.
Mhm.
And I also get the entry gateway so I can have my API requests stay in my own infrastructure and not go out. So only
Yeah.
the Arweave network communication is going out. And I just want that probably like as a Kubernetes manifest, Terraform, whatever, right
Yeah,
now
so that's
nowadays.
it. I mean, the cloud formation, like CDK, right? The cloud formation development kit or the cloud development kit. I mean, that's very common today. Terraform as well is very common for sort of cross cloud pieces. And I mean, these everything you described just then is possible today in the CDK. However, it would need the incentivization and the push from the Arweaves, from the IPFS team, like from these, from Fleek, for example, to do CDN stuff. Like it would need these people to sort of get in there and build them. And I
Yeah.
don't think that's their main focus right now, but I think it probably should be for a lot of them.
Yeah, they're just building the main system right now.
Right. Yeah.
But for Arweave, like I should push Sam, like one of the co-founders, to
Hmm.
do it. I'll have to see if I can reach him first of
Yeah.
all, but get that to him because he was this week complaining about one of the main bundlers. So how Arweave works is you have a data storage server in the background. Sorry, Flynn, I'm not just explaining that for you. I'm just
It's okay.
explaining that to
It's
everyone
all right.
listening. How Arweave works is in the backend, you have many servers with lots and lots of disk space that store anything that is coming on the network because that is the most efficient way to get rewards in the Arweave context. So, say you're a farmer and you have a lot of farmland, you just grow any crop you can have, that any crop that has ever been seen in that network, because that way that is the easiest. You can prove that you are actually growing that crop, and if you can prove that you grow that specific crop that is randomly asked for confirmation now, you will get a reward.
Hmm.
So by that, Arif is incentivizing anyone to store as most of the network, like as much of the network as they can, so that they get the most rewards. And if you then have one person that is running all that infrastructure or multiple persons, you get a decentralized network. That's what Arweave is. But most developers don't want to run all that because it's a burden on them. They just want to post their data there for the permanence and guarantees that they get, right? So then you have services coming up like the AWSs of the world, which provide all that storage infrastructure. In that sense, it's called bundlers. So they just bundle all your data and push it onto the network. And one of the largest ones was internally discussing to just clone Arweave and have their own version with their own token and basically just take over the network in that sense and have their own version run because they have a 90% market share. That would actually work. Nobody would notice besides the 10% not running their software, right?
Yeah.
But that got leaked out
Hmm.
because that's kind of also against the ethos of a
Yeah.
decentralized system to
Yeah.
just rug pull that system. That would be kind of like the AWS employees being like, oh, we have our own hardware. We want the money to go to our own hardware. We just route all the AWS traffic and
Yeah.
instance creation to our own hardware now. And nobody will notice because their applications will still run.
Yeah.
Yes, no one will notice besides Amazon. And we don't care about Amazon, right? Because now we make the money. That is kind
Yeah.
of the analogy they gave. And
Exactly. Yeah.
in that sense, if you had easy creation for those kind of services to just spin up on your own
Hmm.
inside of AWS or any provider, you wouldn't have a 90% market share. You may have a 90% market share in that resource being used, but it's running on way more clouds and infrastructures, so you're decentralized in that sense.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting topic. And I think myself coming from a whole career working in Web2 and having a startup that is a Web3 startup, I sort of come across a lot of walls where I sort of have to question myself and really question like the validity and value of a lot of these things. And I actually don't think that we have learnt to value what decentralization even means yet. I think that's one of the main pieces that I've learned is that we can say things like, oh, decentralized storage, but no one really knows how to value decentralized storage. Why like if you're always having empathy for the customer and going back to the customer doesn't care if the storage is decentralized. They just want to be able to buy that
Mm,
thing from the checkout.
yeah, but in NFTs they do. Like if in the NFT context, just to
Mhm.
explain what that is, in short, you can think of it as an artwork or any kind of piece that is where the identity information is stored on the blockchain. So the blockchain stores who is the owner and what should it be, with all the transfers and all that ownership transfer, as ownership is on the blockchain. And what should that be is defined by that code defining it. And that code, as code always does, can be anything. If you want it to be art, most of the artists care about that staying the same and not being lost over time.
Mm.
So then you would need the permanence and decentralization for that artwork not to be censored and for that artwork to stay there, right?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, we one of our products is a dynamic digital asset platform. So we've built a lot
Yep.
around this space, and I actually don't necessarily agree in that sense. I do think that if you look at the contracts that exist today that are actually renounced, meaning they are truly, let's call them truly immutable in that sense. So there's, of course, two things here. There's decentralization and immutability, which we can talk about both of them. I think they're really interesting
Yep.
topics. But I think that immutability, it's really only a handful of top NFT contracts that are truly renounced. You know, a lot of the teams still
100%.
hold renounced, still hold the ability to change them however they want,
Yes.
which of course in turn means that they can update the IPFS links to be whatever they want as well, meaning they're not immutable or they're not really decentralized either.
Which means in the example I just gave earlier, you can
Yep.
still change the artwork if you're the artist itself, or you get the key to that, like the credentials of the artist, like the
Yeah,
password.
sure. I mean, if the contract's not renounced and you have the private key, you can just update it to point to a Google image.
That's what I'm saying. Like a villain and the artist can do whatever they want and change it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think that I do agree that I think that the Web3 ethos does prioritize that quite heavily, but I don't think, and I'm not sure it's very suitable to the evolution and the sort of the expected growth of popularity that a lot of us want to see, where that still needs to be one of the leading tenets, because also it's a learning curve to even understand it and explain it. And I think that also the business value for the general artist, if we're going to sort of start bringing artists from the traditional world, through like Fiverr and all sorts of different things that exist in the space outside of Web3, I think that you should never need to explain it or understand it. And that means there probably is less of a care about it as well. So it's a very interesting catch-22 there.
I think also that's use case dependent, don't you think?
It does. I think it does depend. I mean, we're talking specifically about NFTs here, but again, of course, NFTs can have many different use cases. Of course, right? It could be art, or it could be some sort of financial construct. It could be real estate. It could be anything along those lines. And so we do need to keep that in mind when we sort of think about it. But yeah, I mean, again, I think there's just different levels of the word decentralization and immutability, right? And I think that a lot of it comes from. If you really start digging into it and wanting to sort of disprove a lot of these things, you sort of will come across a lot of interesting answers. Like, I didn't know that the IPFS team has the final say on what's up on IPFS. They can just remove what they want, right? At the end of the day, that's the way it is. And so it's actually in the terms of service. And I didn't know that till I read it. And I was like, okay, well, that's really interesting. Not that they would, right? Because that would really cause a lot of issues. But I'm sure there are cases
but
where
them being able to do that legally and technically, like the most interesting is they can do that technically.
Exactly.
As long as they have a legal standing in some jurisdiction, they can be forced to do it.
Exactly.
Kind of like we had a privacy solution where you could send money to anyone and nobody would know where it was coming from. It's kind of the one-liner. It was called Tornado Cash. If you Google that, you will get into a full legal battle with the Netherlands and one developer, where the Netherlands basically said, oh, so you're aiding in money laundering by developing that. And the developer said, I don't know who's going to use that system. I don't know who's using that system. It is an open system. Anyone can use it. So I have no control. I have no way of blocking people. So it is public. It's on the blockchain. I don't even control the blockchain. So no, I'm not aiding because I'm in no control and there's nothing I do. So he raised his hand and said, innocent because of no control. Though the Netherlands then set him free after 1 year, because that is also kind of the verdict, and that line was followed, because he's not actively engaging in that.
Yeah, indeed.
Though if he had the right to block addresses in that code, then yes, he would be forced to comply with regulations. He
Hmm.
would be then forced to censor the money laundering suspects
Yeah.
defined by that state, and now you would be in exactly the point where you just said,
Yeah.
where that tool basically now becomes useless because it is not the anonymous privacy solution
Hmm.
that is used. And one of the legal use cases and the awesome use cases of that is if you want to donate anonymously, that is the best way to do it because
Hmm.
there's no centralized record that can be traced back to you. So, say
Yeah.
if you're a billionaire, you want to donate to a foundation and you don't want to have that be the talk of the day or the news, you could have just used that service to donate to their address, and the only thing they would know is, oh, we just got a huge donation. God bless. We'll announce we got it. Thank you to whoever it is, and you can stay quiet.
Yeah.
Um, well, the US now took that away. Any US citizen is not legally allowed to use that solution. There are others. Monero, hello, thank you that you exist. But Secret Network, just to shout out too. But this is something that you have to keep in mind, the regulation and all that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting topic. I think I don't know. It's one of those ones that you can come back to a lot of the time where you start drawing down, especially if you come from a developer or technical side. You start going, okay, like the technical side of some of these things, and then sort of the business side and sort of the legal side
Yeah,
of them as well. And I think a lot of the times I might when I draw things out or try to understand them. This happened with Arweave and IPFS, and then comparing that to S3, of course, which is Amazon's blob storage solution.
yeah,
You know, when you sort of do realize, of course, at the end of the day, someone has the technical capability to remove anything from anything, right? That's the way it is. But it's kind, and so I think
oh, even
demystifying
with
the narrative.
Arweave, you think so?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, legally, of course, you have to be able to
Yeah,
remove illegal content. Otherwise, they're going. No one wants to go to jail. I mean, and that's the
yeah,
thing is the law is no one's above the law. So at the
yeah.
end of the day,
But you would have to change consensus in the way Arweave is structured today. So we'd have to update the nodes itself. If I'm not sure, because if
I
you
think that
store
there's
anything, you could
yeah.
still index it through your node, so you would still get it through the network.
I
So
mean,
that would
that's
be an
it. I
interesting
think that there's
process.
definitely, break glass solutions in place that the team would definitely have ready for situations where there is legal ramifications and so on. I mean, it's like also the same with pinning, right? In IPFS, if it's
Yeah.
not guaranteed to be there, if it doesn't get pinned, and eventually it'll just get
Yeah,
lost.
that's
So it's
why
like,
I always talk Arweave instead of IPFS.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I stopped talking IPFS when I understood the concept of pinning,
yeah,
because with blockchain, the one cool thing is it's pay to use instead of pay per month. So I can pay Arweave once to have my data be on there permanently, no ingress, no egress payments, comparing to the S3 you mentioned
hmm,
earlier,
hmm,
where I have to pay for all that, which is awesome. It gives me a permanence guarantee, whatever that is worth, as we have discussed earlier.
yeah.
Whereas IPFS, you have a monthly fee to keep it pinning,
It's a really
meaning
interesting
you
topic, and
pay your provider.
I've used Arweave a fair bit as well, and of course I've used S3 a bit, and I think it's a really
Yeah,
interesting topic to think
you
about as
using
well.
S3 checks out.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting topic to think about, and I think it's something interesting that probably a lot of folks would find interesting as well. Like where is the actual difference between the two? I'd actually like to think if we if we thought about it for a second, I struggle to find the difference between the two to an extent. On
S
certain things, other than performance and scalability and so on.
S3 and Arweave or IPFS and
No,
S3?
like I mean S3 and Arweave, and of course I know the similarities to them, but what I'm sort of getting at here is I think that the common misconception is that people would say things like S3 is not decentralized or something like that, right? But they're just the concept of the word decentralized, meaning
No.
cross-region or singular company, right? Or like the
Mm.
authority.
Yeah,
But
it
as we
means
sort of
singular
come back to,
authority. In the sense that most people in the blockchain field use decentralized, they first of all mean it has to be a distributed system, which S3 with replication is, because obviously Amazon doesn't just have it on one server. Like, what are you guys doing? You have no backups, no retention. Just get ISO certified. Thank you.
yeah,
Do you want to be in any of the
yeah,
like public contracts? Oh, you have been certified now. Okay, you have backups and all that. But then you go into the one organization thing where that is the one that most people talk about. They want it to be distributed and across companies, and then we just talked about, okay, yeah, but the IPFS team has their law. The
Yeah.
Arweave team we will see, but there's, as far as I know, there's one Arweave client, but don't quote me on that. Yeah,
You know
on
what's
that
interesting?
more.
You know what is an interesting thought here, Samuel, as well? Is like, imagine what the repercussions for Amazon dropping data. So let's imagine that Amazon deleted some data. That is
Mm,
a
Yep.
thousand times heavier than what it would be for Arweave, right? If Amazon started
Yes.
deleting data for customers, their whole
Google
business
had that
would go to the
happen with
ground.
Google Drive. If
What
you
was that?
heard the
Sorry?
last, if you heard that the last couple of months, I've seen more and more reports on like Reddits and so on, people complaining that Google Drive being messed up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can see how quickly it would turn into, the big vendor, the Microsoft, Google, or Amazon
Yeah,
is deleting my and customer trust is the most important thing. Right? You'd never want to
yeah,
lose that, and all it takes is one, negative experience for that to happen.
yeah,
So, when it's like people sort of say like, oh, but this big company could delete my stuff. It's like, no, they really can't. Like, unless you're breaking the law and you're doing something illegal, which is
yeah.
exactly the same as company over here or whatever. I think it's a really interesting discussion because I think it just
Yeah, but then the blockchain comes in. Like, if you have a system, I'll just use Ethereum because that's the gold standard we
hmm
have today for
hmm
decentralization, as we have just discussed. Because Ethereum itself is not only developed by the Ethereum Foundation, there are also third-party companies and teams working closely with the actual development of clients.
hmm
Like clients meaning the thing that actually runs the network.
hmm
These are written in different languages, so we have many there. You have more than one there, which is like decentralization in language. You have decentralization in teams. You have decentralization in people running them, like physical location and servers, because some of them run on AWS, some of them run in some home networks, some
hmm
of them run on some other cloud providers, some of them run on smaller cloud providers like local ones.
yep,
In Germany, for example, because
yeah,
people want them to use them on their virtual machine instead of their home network and so on.
hmm
So Ethereum in that sense is the most decentralized we have. I think I'm not taking Bitcoin because Bitcoin is through the mining just not
it's
decentralized
it's
in
61% centralized over three companies.
yeah
If you want the stats,
in that sense.
yeah,
But the consensus mechanism of Bitcoin with the actual proof of work and the energy input may be a better one that we have that what Ethereum transitioned to with stake and economic power. That is another full-on discussion. But for the stake of decentralization and the how we defined it, Ethereum is the gold standard. Just taking away the comments from the Bitcoin guys here. Um, it's not proof of stake with proof of work. It's actual network decentralization we're talking. Um, and there you would then go, okay, on the storage discussion, how would that look like? Okay, Amazon S3, the back end itself, so like the nodes, the client, that is mainly probably just one inside Amazon. There's one developing it, Amazon, but if you want to access it, the S3 API has been implemented by so many different clients that it has become de facto the standard for
hmm
object storage.
yep,
Like I'm a big fan of MinIO, which is an
hmm
open source project, and I just love it because it's open source. Sorry,
yep,
Amazon, but it still uses the same S3 stack. I'm also a fan of things like Longhorn for inside of
yep,
Kubernetes, and
yep,
they all comply to the S3. So kind of like in the blockchain space where the EVM and Ethereum's coding practices have become sort of the de facto standard as we know them in 2023. S3 is for storage. And then you look into that, the closest one, there's no closest one to Ethereum in terms of storage besides storing stuff on Ethereum. Because there, no, if I'm posting any illegal stuff, not to name any specifics, on Ethereum, that will never go away. Uh, and there's no one to actually comply with.
well,
Like the
yeah, I mean,
companies,
yeah,
the companies, what they will do is they will just not show my stuff. But if I run my
hmm
own node, I will have my stuff run.
yeah. No, I think at that point, if there's someone that interested in storing something illegal, then they should probably reassess what they're doing with their life. I think.
Yeah, no, but if you want to go to that extent, because you're a theorist that is
Hmm.
talking about ultimate control of
Yeah.
bad corporation, evil corp, cyberpunk type of scenario,
Yeah.
then right now Ethereum is your best storage solution, though storage is so limited that you can't really store, say, a movie on there.
Yeah.
You may be able to store your one family picture or some text.
Oof. I think it'd be very expensive. I mean, if you were able to sort of somehow hash it into call data and inscribe it and then read it back, maybe. But I
Yeah,
don't think you'd be wanting to store an image
yeah,
even, above eight
exactly.
bit.
And that's just where we are today with the amount of decentralized storage that we're talking, actually having defined the word decentralization properly
Yeah,
for once. Like, thank you
exactly.
for actually coming up with the definition of the word decentralized and breaking down what that means.
Yeah, no worries. It's a really interesting piece, and I think that it's something that comes up quite often in discussion, and it's something that doesn't come up nearly as often as I think more important discussions, which are just about more like
Yeah,
users, making it user friendly, right? There's a lot of things around account abstraction
yeah.
and things that we're seeing happen now. But while private keys exist, I think that we're still in a bit of a that's the discussion I'd like to see more people sort of talk about, like how can I get my
Yeah.
make this more
But
usable.
if you're talking account abstraction and moving the private key, where we like to say not your key, not your coins,
Mm-hmm.
um, with account abstraction and people managing the keys for you because you want to log in with email and password, we're now moving
Mm-hmm.
back in terms of decentralization
Yes.
for the
Yes.
simple ease of use benefits. Uh,
Definitely, and I think that we're heading that way. We're seeing it now with logs, as you might have seen shadow
no,
logs.
no, 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 no! Don't move the logs out. If you
Well, I
move
mean,
logs out,
there's
you
lots
take
of
out
benefits to
code
doing it.
explosion.
There's
No,
lots
there's
of
no benefit to doing it. The only benefit to not doing it is money.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I
And
mean, of course.
then don't use a blockchain. If you have your logs outside, and I will call that out publicly. So if I'm developing a solution and we have our logs, like our smart contract logs outside of the blockchain, ever in the future, send me this episode and I will manually go in and code it in. Yes, I'm 23 right now. I might turn 83 if I'm lucky. I have 60 years to be sent this clip. Feel free.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I think when I saw and I read about Shadow specifically,
Yeah.
I was a little bit like, okay, do we really need this? Like, what is it we're really trying to solve here?
Like if you want to do Web 2, do Web 2.
Well, I
Is
mean,
what
this
I'm
is the
saying.
thing. This is the thing. The EVM as a computer is computationally horrible for many things. Even complex mathematics it can't do, right? I mean,
No.
it's horrible. I mean, it can't make API calls. It can't run machine learning inference. It can't do aggregation
Well,
over multiple data sets. It's
well,
horrible, right? So
it technically can. It practically can't
yeah, okay.
because of the decentralized nature and you wanting it only to take 12 seconds to do a computation.
I mean, the opcodes don't support it. So if there was someone who built in all of those potential operations to do that complex stuff, of course
Yeah.
the gas would be astronomical. Gas limit would have to go up.
Oh,
Block
you could
gas
do
limit
that
would have
with
to go
add,
up.
multiply, and all that.
Oh
So
my lord! No thanks. No, so
you have an 80s computer here. You
uh,
can.
so I do believe strongly in a future where co-processing is a big thing, and the product that we're building at
Yeah.
Somnio is the business that me and my co-founders have. We're building a co-processing platform
Yeah.
that uses Docker as an interface, so you can basically package up your code, push it as a container, and then that can run in response to events on smart contracts. And this is sort of
Yeah.
aligned with what we see Shadow doing as well. And I do think in the future, as we see this industry evolve, we are going to see more, right? Things will move off chain if they don't need to be on chain. And I'm
Oh,
happy with that. I think that's a great way to
that I
evolve.
agree with. But then just have your smart contract still do EVM typical logs.
Sure. Yeah. They can do typical logs.
That is like my point is if your computation doesn't need to be on chain, move it off chain, have your logs off chain. But your smart contract logs, why should they be off chain? Like the thing that needs to be on chain for these kind of logs to be off chain then makes no sense. Like
Yeah.
if your logs can be off chain, your code doesn't need to be on chain.
Well,
Is my line
potentially.
of
I
reasoning.
mean, there's still potentially. I think what it's more about is that the interface in which we consume and index logs now is
Yeah,
not really ideal, right? Things like the Graph and
yeah,
AirStack and all these
yeah,
great
yeah,
products, right? Subscribing to a WebSocket and pulling logs off on every single event, right? Think about how
yeah,
OpenSea works, right? Every time, if I open my MetaMask right now and send you an ERC 721, like they have no idea. It's not on OpenSea. I'm doing it through MetaMask, so they have to be
Yeah.
subscribed to every transfer of every 721. And that is, of course, is a subscription to a log that's being
Oh,
emitted
I
from an ERC
think either
721
I
contract.
or
So
Flynn.
I get what you're saying. It's just incredibly expensive computationally and infrastructure wise to be monitoring and listening for everything and updating indexes. So maybe Shadow can do something different there, where they make that cheaper and more efficient. But again, let's see how that
But
sort of
then
unfolds.
that's an aggregation of logs. So now you're taking the blockchain logs and you aggregate them. Wait, I'll have to get another camera battery soon. Shit,
Sure.
I'm just seeing it blink, and I'm looking at where do I have them. Okay, good, found one.
No worries.
So I can change that as soon as the layer goes out. But the logs being off chain, then if you're building an aggregation service, so kind of like the subscribe to logs, I think that is very beneficial. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that we're moving the logs of, say, the ERC 721, so the token. So I don't move the log of having moved the token off chain.
Mm-hmm.
That makes no sense. That is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
If you
gotcha.
do co-processing, I love it. Just
Mm-hmm.
post a zero knowledge proof
Mm-hmm.
to the chain, and then
Yeah,
the camera just went off. Um,
no worries.
you can just post, okay, I just did that computation, post it on chain,
Yeah,
and with it now being on chain and proven cryptographically, we can move forward with the on-chain stuff that needs to be on chain because you've proven it, right?
mm-hmm.
So if your prover is then open and all that, I'm all for it. Like, please make it more efficient and awesome.
Yeah,
But like I said, the logs of off-chain stuff, of on-chain stuff, why?
yeah. No, I think that, as you said before, there's some financial incentive as well. So we'll see what happens. I do think there's, in order for us to evolve in this, we do need to sort of start thinking about how, we can sort of apply a lot of the EVM computer concepts to these broader computing technologies like
Yeah.
machine learning. And file access, I/O, all those sort of things. We can't do them in the EVM. So I
No,
mean,
you have to plug it in through
right.
APIs or through specific smart contracts for that, which is highly inefficient, like Chainlink.
Highly inefficient and incredibly long running and cost impacted. But yeah,
But my TLDR on that would be there will be a layer 2 that does that. There are networks like Fuel currently moving into that direction where they will have those specific functionalities and then just settle their proof of having done stuff on Ethereum to gain
yeah.
that kind of security guarantee and be like, yes, we are still, in that sense, a network that respects all the Ethereum stuff. We're interoperable with Ethereum. You can use your Ethereum stuff, but we just added a lot on top. So
That's
you
it.
have to
I
be
think
wary of that.
sort of that's where sort of my thought is as well. I actually see the future of, believe it or not, I see it in a little bit of a different way, where
Yeah.
pretty much a smart contract function is just one line, and it's only used for a record of transaction and state storing a proof, right? The function would be like,
Ooh.
run my computation, it emits one log, all computing happens off chain, and then a proof
Yeah.
is just put back in. So there'll be zero logic at all in any layer, because at
But
the end
that
of the day,
scaled.
that scales incredibly well, because the function logic becomes one line, the gas becomes very, very low because of no opcodes.
Then
But you still have a global consensus. You
yeah,
still have a global
yeah,
storage state for the
yeah.
proofs and everything.
Then the only thing you need to do is also store not only the proof itself, but all the data needed to reproduce the proof.
Yeah. So the proof, but the data to reproduce the proof would be the input to the emitted log. So the log emits out and emits with some data, right? So that could be input to the function.
So,
and
or
then,
kind of like the Docker file.
yeah, exactly. And that's sort of
Um,
what we did in our specific example.
yeah,
We're using the shard of the container.
Docker file with the specific inputs as well. You probably need those as well.
Yeah. I mean, the inputs, which are the values emitted from the log, right? So the log emits, which starts the event, which writes it back. And this is sort of like how we see it. It's like, it scales incredibly well. It's incredibly cheap. Again, when you store the hash, you only store it in call data, so you don't make any state changes on the gas for storing the hash. You can still verify it in call data. It works really well. So, but yeah, who knows? That's just kind of how I like to think of it.
No, we'll see. Like I'm incredibly interested in how that future is going to turn out, and I think there are incredible teams like yours who will build all that. And And if you go into like building on the blockchain, I think we covered most of the trade-offs, and
Hmm.
we had a lot of downside discussion right now.
Hmm.
What do you think are actual some just general benefits you would tell a C-suite board, just like a boardroom
Yeah.
of building on the blockchain?
Yeah, I think definitely being able to build an application that spans different countries or different borders, or even electronically or physically, that you can build an application where trust can be sort of upheld to the highest standard, without having to sort of say like, oh well, we don't really want to work with X project or even X country, but if they confine to these set of rules which are governed by the network, then it will be completely fine because they have to sort of abide by that. I think
Yep.
from the executives that I've spoken with and applications that I've built both in the private blockchain space and public blockchain space, it resonates super well, right? It's a really good narrative, and I think that it plays strongly into the idea of, okay, well, I want to be able to work with this country or company or whatever, and I think one part where I see that a lot, see that a lot is in regulation, right? Upholding certain regulation. Certain companies want to ensure that their competitors are also compliant and upholding certain regulation.
Yep.
So for companies to be able to have whether it's a private blockchain or a public blockchain, some sort of immutable ledger where they can sort of say, hey, look, I'm compliant, you can see it all here, and you can see theirs as well, and they can share that between each other. That's really powerful. So I think that's really one of the main pieces for sort of building.
Also for antitrust stuff, right?
Yep.
Like what you
Yep.
just covered is for not only for business perspective, but also for a government perspective. For a
Mm-hmm.
business perspective, it would be like, oh, we can prove to our customers that
Mm-hmm.
that claim is actually true all the
Yep.
time, because we open source our technology, and then we would have to go to the open, which is kind of my open versus private discussion.
Yep.
My view is I can trust you, but it's harder to trust you. You need to have more of a track record for me to trust you if your stuff is closed and I
Yeah.
can't see it. Well, if it's open, I can simply just verify it myself and I can trust you.
Yeah.
Kind of like you said with AWS is S3. I trust you guys to keep my data stored. Like I have personal stuff on S3, and I'll also likely have some business stuff in S3 in the future. I have customers who have that stuff on S3. Like we trust you guys, but we can't verify that trust is well spent. Besides just looking at there being no public outcry, right?
Yeah.
That's
I
kind
mean,
of the difference.
I see what you're saying, but it's a very, it can go into a very long discussion about that further for sure. But I see what you're saying. I think it just comes down to the definition of what verifying is at that point.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. I can always verify that my data is still available for me, but I can't do that for another company, for example, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
so there's more nuance to it, but the general meta set of me thinking, okay, maybe if you're now doing blockchain and want to actually prove some statement, you may want to think about being more open.
mm,
Um, is where I'm coming from. Also, I have to say that my background is also in IT security, where most of the tooling and stuff is open source because sharing is caring.
yep, yep.
Is
Well,
sort
I
of
mean,
the
for sure,
corporation mindset there.
for
Because
sure.
in the security space, if you have a good tool to verify security, you want to share it, first of all, for kudos.
Mhm.
Second of all, for just making the world a better place. Because if you are more secure, your customer is also more secure. Anyone in security defense wants to share because anyone needs to be more secure, and they can't
Mhm.
take care for anyone anyways. Like I
Mhm.
can't have every business in the world be my customer, and I realized that, so I shared my security tool. So
Yeah,
this is kind of where I come from, just to
yeah,
give
yeah,
a little bit
definitely.
of my background
Definitely.
of why I'm advocating for that.
No, I mean it's a social economy as well. I think open source,
Yeah.
and I mean the biggest open source contributors in the world are Microsoft and Amazon, right? They have the
Oh
most
yeah.
amount. Like it's like incredible.
In the Linux kernel, it's Intel and AMD,
Yeah,
and those kind of guys, because they have economic incentives to make their CPUs work well
for
with
sure, for sure.
what
I mean,
people are
and
using.
so much of the programming landscape is built by
But
the big players as
but
well.
there you have to say that yes, they do contribute, but would they be the biggest contributors in open source if the system initially wouldn't have been open source, right?
I mean, yeah, hard to say. Of course, it's a
Um,
lot of this again ties into some sort of economical
yeah,
structure, whether it's
also
social.
some kind of social construct, because
Yeah.
in Google there's a I recommend anyone to go out and look at the Kubernetes documentary by Honeypot,
Hmm.
which is a really interesting business level discussion in the middle of it about open sourcing Kubernetes, which is, I must say, the most awesome tool for orchestrating workloads or orchestrating anything, because it's basically just an API layer. If you just take what Kubernetes actually is, it's just an
Hmm.
API layer.
Yep.
It's used as an orchestration tool. Um, and it's so powerful that Google could have used that, and they had something like that internally to
Hmm.
just be the most efficient company in the world when it comes to scaling compute.
Hmm.
They open sourced it, and now anyone is basically using it.
Hmm.
Um, the idea there was we needed to be open source for it to be adapted, and our stuff that we want to do to work well with it,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
instead of keeping that powerful weapon inside of Google. So
That's it. The social credibility is massive, honestly, as well, and it makes people aspire to want to work there. And it really, it's what we're
yeah.
seeing right now with Meta and the AI space. I think Meta is going to be the absolute
Oh,
biggest company in the world in the next 5-10 years.
with
Nvidia and Meta basically dominate everything because of what they've done with PyTorch, what they're doing with Llama.
yes,
You know,
Llama is the reason I think of Meta as a
yep,
technical cool company again,
yep, yep,
because I fell
exactly,
out of love with Meta after Cambridge Analytica in 2016. I
yeah,
deeply have
yeah,
fallen in love with them before, technically, for their React and React Native stuff they did. Then fell out of love with them, even though I still admired the kind of tech stack they had, just
Mhm.
because of Cambridge Analytica and the moral stuff,
yeah,
which checks out with my background and even my advocation here, where I'm basically showing all my flags, but which is basically just advocate for open. But if
yeah,
closed
definitely.
makes the most sense, let's build closed. Like I'm a pragmatist at heart. I
Yeah.
just have some values as well, but
Of course, I mean we're all human. But I
um,
love the
and
I
then
love
now I'm
the
back on the meta track
yeah, no, it's
with
so good.
Llama
Like
being
basically
open.
saying like, hey, we'll bring in the best researchers possible, but you have to sort of make it open and available. Like it's I think what Zuckerberg is doing. Like who would have thought he just becomes the absolute open source master of the whole thing? It's
Oh,
incredible.
he's been a top G in that sense
Yeah,
for a long time with
yeah,
React and all that being
yeah,
open.
yeah. React.
Um,
Yeah,
the thing that he does is he doesn't have a business incentive to keep it closed,
hmm.
because he's advertising data. He's not
Yeah,
advertising the models itself. There's the difference between him and Microsoft, where Microsoft is monetizing the models themselves. And I think that is the biggest difference, which also makes it easy for him to not have the discussion we just had with public-private blockchains and all
for
that, right?
sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there. I think that having basically Llama be the base for a lot of other models to get created, and of course PyTorch be prevalent in that space
Yeah,
as well is a big piece. It's like a bit of a sneaky sort of slide into the bottom of something, and before we know it, it'll be there for everything. I mean, I don't really know
yeah.
anyone who talks about TensorFlow anymore when you
No,
compare the two.
but TensorFlow was the big one before PyTorch somehow became good again.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Google, like the whole idea of open sourcing those kind of powerful tools for the executive listening,
Hmm.
if they still are after the tech stuff, maybe probably they learned a lot, because we're diving, we're not diving deep into specific implementation, but we're rather deep language wise.
Hmm.
Um, though the idea of open sourcing those kind of tools is if you hire somebody who's using those kind of tools or has used that at another company, you hire somebody who knows your system and you can easily integrate, and you know
Yeah.
they are great with the stuff you want to do.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. No, I think that there's so much value in it. Of course, as you said before, though, I think it's very true. The selling or the making available of foundation models is a whole business in itself, which is separate
Yes.
to what we're seeing with Llama as well. Even though Llama is a foundational model, the abstraction is not there. They're not packaging it up and saying like, "Here's a pretty interface and here's the API," right? Like what?
Yeah, and
what
that's why I'm saying, like, he doesn't have the discussion with the board to make it
yeah,
open,
yeah,
while he will have that discussion with the metaverse
yeah, yeah.
potentially, if, and that is what I hope he will do,
Hmm.
is with his metaverse, he will hopefully have it be built in React Native for all the devices they have.
Ooh.
Um, just don't comment on the React Native technical
I
stuff,
won't.
thank you. But because that's just what they have. he will have it. I'll abstract it away for you. Flynn. He will have that built in his framework that he wants it to be in,
Hmm.
make that fully open, but sell the gateway to his metaverse
Hmm.
with the how's it called, the Oculus
Oculus
headsets.
Quest, the Quest.
Yes, where anyone will use the Oculus hardware because he will have that be the best one for that. While he needs to get developers in, so he needs to open his floodgates. Though I'm not sure if he will open the infrastructure side of things. Because if he
No.
just opens the SDK, kind of like the AWS SDK for
Mm.
building with AWS and running
Mhm.
any language you can in AWS, how to run your own AWS and how to actually be part of AWS isn't public. Kind
Yeah.
of like a blockchain, public blockchain would be.
Mm.
So I hope he will have a open metaverse, but he could have just built a closed one and have game publishers be in their world like they are in Oculus right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think it's a really interesting topic. Maybe a discussion that we can sort of dive into another time. It's like a
Yeah,
very long one. I think AI
yeah,
and
yeah,
blockchain
yeah,
is a whole discussion, and AI and metaverse, or metaverse and
yeah,
blockchain is a whole discussion in itself.
yeah.
I
Like,
just got a VR headset though. I got the PS5 VR2, and I must say it's absolutely incredible. I love it. I'm a big Gran Turismo 7 player,
oh yeah, then you
and
love it.
it's incredible. I put my friends on it when they come over, and it's so immersive. They're just like, I feel sick. I got to get out. It's so good. Like, you know, it's good if they feel sick.
Yeah, no, that's
I
awesome.
love
That's
it.
awesome.
Yeah.
With blockchain in general, what do you think is the biggest business problem and core problem that it solves?
The biggest business problem. I mean, I think. Well, I mean that does play into the point before around having a business that can span. I think if we start to think about potential use cases for businesses, because I think that there are a lot of ideas floated out there, like supply chain, right? Like I think this is one that
Yep.
you sort of hear a lot of. I think that is a very large scale problem. As we saw over the last 3 years, we had all sorts of issues with that. I mean, those were physical issues of boats getting stuck in canals that blockchain wouldn't have
Yep.
solved. But I think the idea there is that being able to basically go across a border and sort of solve that. So I think that in a sense, I think supply chain is not yet one of those things. I mean, because it is a really interesting topic to sort of think about how. And I don't want to go too far into supply chain because it's just one example, but there's many different examples that we can sort of go into. But I think as it relates to sort of replacing a global currency, right? Because a lot of people say like, oh, well, the US dollar is the global currency for global supply chain. China uses that, everyone uses that. That's sort of the way it is. But that's kind of one of the drawbacks on the potential use of supply chain being there. But I think from a technological perspective, I think it's definitely got the potential, right? IoT sensors and all sorts of things monitoring a supply chain and creating immutable records of the data that's or of the transcripts that's in the shipping containers, all that sort of stuff. I think technologically it completely checks out. So I think that's a potential business problem that can be solved.
Yep.
I think also making, like I said before, compliancy, regulation, compliancy on regulation is a massive one. I think that's going to be huge, especially with there's a lot of new regulations that are coming in, not just in Europe, but in all over the world. And I think being able to
Europe.
prove compliancy, proving compliancy along regulation is going to be a big one. And
My,
also,
my my German efficiency heart hurts. But even here in Germany nowadays because of bureaucracy, but especially when heard in European regulations.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, in all sorts of sectors too, right? Automotive has a
Yeah.
lot of regulations coming up in the next few years. There's a lot, of course, in the finance
As
space.
long as we have unlimited autobahn, I can still somehow, if I'm able to afford it, buy an old car and still have the good old ways on German autobahn.
Exactly. You just
But
have to go to the good old mechanic and pay probably a big premium on your good old car.
oh, like actually close to Frankfurt, and my parents, there's a family, son and his father.
Hmm.
They work just on old Porsches.
Nice.
Like the only thing they do is 70s, 60s to 90s Porsches. They
Love
can
it.
also do the modern ones,
Hmm.
but they specialize in the old ones. So you just go there if you have the old one, bring it in, and their bill is cheaper than the actual official
Yeah.
Porsche stuff. They actually use the official parts because
Wow.
Porsche
Yeah.
sells it to them. you just don't have the kind of warranty stuff because they're not an official dealer. But if your car is 30, 40, 50
Yeah,
years old, you don't have a warranty anyways. You're lucky that Porsche still has the parts because it's
exactly.
Porsche. Um, and they sell it to you, and they do an amazing
I can
job.
imagine they're probably really good. They must see a lot of old Porsches come in
Hey,
then, and yeah,
man, they're way better than the Frankfurt Porsche Centrum. Like we had one go into the Frankfurt, like the old one, go into the Frankfurt facility. It's a 1988 Porsche. It
hmm.
went in there, and the Porsche Centrum was basically like, "Oh, that damage wasn't
Yeah.
there before, dude. We took pictures before. We're not dumb." We showed them the picture with the timestamp on the phone
Hmm.
of that. That was before we gave it to you. Yeah, that was after. They're like, no, no, no. They denied it.
Oh no.
Then through some like lucky chain of events, my dad was able to get a new one.
Hmm.
And when you get the new one, we went to Stuttgart to
Hmm.
pick that one up to the like official facility. Luckily,
Hmm.
we're in Germany, so we can
Yeah.
actually go to the original like Porsche main
Yeah.
headquarters to pick that one up. And then after returning, they sent a questionnaire out from the headquarters saying like, "Oh, how was your experience getting the Porsche?" And there he said, "Oh, it was nice,
Hmm.
but this is the history with my old one. Like, how can that happen
Yeah.
with me buying from Frankfurt now?" And then he got a call from the marketing boss from the thing in Frankfurt, from that Centrum, being like, "Why did you put that in there? Because that went straight to headquarters, right?"
No.
And now we just use the local one. So yeah,
Yeah.
if you have a global business, those
Ah,
kind of things and specialities and going around regulations and enforcing that to be good, I think is an awesome thing, because then you can be like, oh, I don't have quality assurance issues
mhm.
because the code submitted or the data submitted to my code has
I
to
mean,
be quality.
I mean, going also, a business problem, as you just mentioned, right? Like a vehicle identification number or a VIN, right, on an engine, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
this sort
yeah.
of thing is, having a complete record of automotive maintenance and battery changes and incidents and insurance claims and all those. Like, there's a fantastic opportunity for the automotive industry to utilize public blockchain and that
Yeah.
specifically there is basically a hash of a state, right? The checkpoint of a state of the car being inserted and hashed. I think that's also
Yeah,
a really, I mean,
I
there's,
think
there's so many
blockchain
there.
itself are state mechanisms and logs.
Yeah, exactly.
Like before coming up with the rough like outline for the conversations,
Mm,
I've asked myself, how would what is the core thing of blockchain to me? And
mm,
it's logs and state.
mm.
So statements, for example,
Yeah.
I state that that vehicle number and that actual state, like the how it is, the color, all that, the
Hmm.
parts in there
Hmm.
are at that point that thing, and the
Hmm.
blockchain somehow verifies that.
Hmm.
That is what blockchain is at its core. If you use that for a database to store data as the state, if you have logs in there being like, oh, Flynn moved from
Mm,
Australia to
mm,
Europe,
mm,
and Flynn is now at Amazon, and Flynn moved there. Those
mm.
could be logs, kind of like events. This
Yep,
could also be the state, like the state of Flynn could be on the chain. The state of
definitely.
the governance, or what you
I mean,
said,
yeah,
like the
you
regulation in
replay the log
compliance
from the
could be on
first
it.
log to get to the current state, right? That's the beauty of it, right? Because you can
Yes,
just replay the log.
yes,
you know?
yeah,
No.
and like that's what it is to me. But in the whole space, what are you most excited about now?
Uh, um, I am excited about. I think what I do really like to see at the moment. I think the whole two ecosystem. I think is really growing a lot. I think that's exciting. I think what we're seeing around, like again, going into sort of like away from the business side, the technological side for a second. I think having Ethereum just turn into a massive global data availability layer. I think that's awesome, right? I think we just end up
Yeah,
with this really amazing DA layer, and all these L2s and all these businesses start building on this and sort of associating their reputation. Like, I mean, even looking at Base, for example, right? Like, they're
ooh,
basically
that's
associated there. They've associated this whole chain and everything they're doing there on the success and availability of Ethereum.
yeah,
So I think that's really admirable of them to do, and I think that more businesses will probably follow suit.
yep,
And so I don't know. I think that part of it is quite exciting to me. Um, yeah, I think that's just more of a technological thing. I can't say I haven't seen a lot of there's things that I really want to be excited about that I think will come very soon, like games and so on. I'm not really there yet on a lot of that, but I do want to see that flourish and to become a big thing. So I think that we'll see some more fun games, as we sort of spoke about before, sort of appear, which would be fantastic. But what about you? What are you most excited about?
Well, for the gaming side, I just would love the hybrid thing I
Yep.
explained to
Yep.
exist, because I think the gaming itself is it's so difficult if you don't
Mm-hmm.
actually understand incentives to build a good game. Like, there's a reason Counter Strike has been in existence for 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I myself will get a 10-year coin. And
Mm-hmm.
now being more of a free time gamer, and even
Mm-hmm.
back then, I'm mainly just a Counter Strike guy because of the competitive juices and it being so good in making me addicted to the
Yes.
competition.
Yeah. Definitely.
As I'm a very competitive person, kind of
Mm-hmm.
probably like the car games for you.
Mm-hmm.
You just probably have one racetrack that you play 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not going
Nurburgring.
the Grand Prix routes.
The
Oh yeah.
Nurburgring.
Oh, doesn't Nürburgring get boring? Don't you need to do no content? like,
Oh
like,
my god!
like
It's
the casual player wants new content, right? I just want Nürburgring or
yeah,
like whatever Counter Strike map, and just get better, better, faster, faster,
yeah.
right?
Dust
Um,
too. Yeah.
yeah, I hate that map, but like, no, I don't really like hate
No,
specifically the map. I hate
yeah.
how the games play out on that map because it's more of an aim map instead
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
tactics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but that's just me. Others prefer it, like it's the most popular thing in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
But those kind of games, and then using for example, the item transfer that I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to before. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my Counter Strike inventory is a couple $1,000 just
Yep.
because as a high school student I bought in for a couple hundred
Yep.
with all my like spare cash and Christmas gifts. When I
Nice.
stopped receiving Lego and I received money, I bought Counter Strike skins.
Yep. Yep.
Sorry, mom and dad, but they know though. They know.
Of course.
And then it turned into now being worth something, kind of like nobody expected crypto to be worth
Mm-hmm.
much besides a small amount of people, and now
Yeah.
some are rich. I just have a little more money in Counter Strike now. No, nothing significant, but using that and being able to play the original Counter Strike thing,
Yeah.
how it is supposed to look in Counter Strike,
Yeah.
in say Call of Duty. Like, Call of Duty introduced knives and different knife colors in a couple versions ago, especially also in their like multiplayer free to play Warzone,
Mm.
where I'm like, if I could play my Counter Strike knife in there, you
I'm
would at least
excited for
get
that.
me to try the game. Like, if
Yeah.
you announce that feature, I'm going over to
I'm
at least
excited.
try it.
I 100%, and I actually I've spoken to colleagues a lot about this who work in the augmented reality field, right? And I mean,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, you need to 3D model these knives for the different games, right? I mean, if
yeah, that's fair.
Activision shares an asset with Valve or whatever, that would be the absolute dream. But I don't think that
Yeah,
they'll do that. But it's
yeah,
possible, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, if digital assets stop being associated with SVGs or GIFs or PNGs as we see them now, and get started getting
yeah,
associated with 3D models that can be re-rendered on the fly. Again, playing into what I was talking about before, like that 3D rendering of models or storing a model that's going to be stored off chain,
yeah.
unless storage becomes really cheap.
Or you build a layer 2 that is specific for that.
Potentially, but then
But
again,
likely it will be a solution like the one you're building, where you just verify
yeah,
the
yeah,
game state
yeah,
using that
exactly,
asset. So like
exactly,
you're like, okay, I verify that my game state uses the actual model hash, while the publisher, in that sense Valve, pushes the newest hash to
yeah,
the blockchain. So the network just is like, oh no, I reject your current game state because there's an update from Valve. So please update now.
potentially,
And then you would
yeah,
probably have to have a grace period that could be in contract logic. Like, some games
yeah,
will likely have a grace period, others won't. Just because it's like, oh, game skin can have a 1 day grace period where every developer then has to update to the newest game skin. While if you
definitely.
use our Counter Strike weapon mechanics, if I patch the weapon mechanic, your game state has to update.
Definitely. And I
Like a
think
thing.
that one really interesting thing here is always thinking like, I mean, I think this is a really interesting angle, but it's always like, okay, well, or is it just easier for, like Activision or whoever to get on the phone with Valve and say, hey, like, let's do a collaboration. And then they agree and
Yeah.
they actually swap assets suitable for both engines and for the game.
Yeah.
I think that it's kind of like, I think that will probably be an easier solution and a more risk
Mm,
tolerant solution for their
yeah.
businesses.
But then they will have to, if they then swap assets and agree on a standard, I would love those executives to then be like, let's make it open.
Hmm. Yep.
because even if they don't make the blockchain version, but just the open standard,
Yep.
that
That's a great
standard will
step.
likely be,
Yeah.
first of all, adapted by Unreal Engine
Yeah.
and Unity. So now you have an asset standard, which kind of exists in the gaming world. I'm not
Yeah.
too deep, but
Hmm.
there is at least work being done on
Hmm.
standardizing 3D assets, because companies are like, we want to somehow use stuff
Yeah.
others do just because we want to buy it from you,
Yeah.
is what they say, because we can't build the worlds from zero anymore
Hmm.
because it's getting too expensive and too complex. So kind of the money is already moving in towards making that more interoperable because it
Hmm.
makes economic sense nowadays.
Hmm.
And then
Definitely.
if you move that, if you then get some hackers like us two in a basement, being like, oh, let's just make a blockchain exchange for that. That makes economic sense because we've seen decentralized exchanges take off,
Hmm.
which makes sense because they remove fees. And then now you're here. And now the companies are like, oh, we actually have to support that exchange now. Let's just use the assets from the exchange straight away.
Yeah. No,
And
I love the
this is
idea.
the way I can see it work. I just want to see that.
It's one of the ways I think that the path of least resistance and what is going to
Yeah,
make the customers have the best experience. If I hope that with all these decisions, if any of these businesses do implement these sort of things, they say like, yeah, but how does the customer actually get the skin? Like, forget about
yeah,
blockchain, forget about any of these other things. Like, is it the best experience for the customer? Like, that has to be the
yeah,
best. That
yeah.
has to be the only answer.
If you then add modding, and the endless possibilities of modding, then it is the best experience. Otherwise, it's I'd say it's unproven to me. If
I
you add
mean,
in modding, I'd say
sure,
yes.
sure, but I mean, even that, it's like best. It's all subjective to the player base and where they're coming from and the devices, right? I mean, you could say like
Yeah,
add modding to an
yeah,
iPad game and it would benefit zero users because
yeah.
it's on an iPad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, true,
Yeah.
true, true. Or like modding could be also that you can just leverage in the game and build your own spin-off,
Hmm.
where you would still need to buy the full game to play the spin-off. So you could have an iPad app where you would have,
Hmm.
say, Counter-Strike or Call of Duty installed,
Hmm.
because we have those two examples. And only if you have those two installed, you can use
Hmm. Hmm.
the mod game, like the say Flynn game
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
iPad, and that would work for some technical reason with some SDK that isn't built yet.
Yeah.
And then the payment of royalties would go through blockchain because the actual Activision or Valve doesn't trust the third-party developer to pay them the fee, so they would just implement one system because that SDK is industry standard now. And if it's not
I like
industry
that
standard,
idea. Yeah, no, I like that idea. I think as a I think I was having this conversation with a friend the other day, and just like the
yeah,
best use case for crypto, in my mind still is just being able to pay someone in another country instantly, right? Like being able to. I
yep,
still think it's absolutely incredible that you can just pay someone with no well, very little fee. Um,
yeah.
in any country and just have them use it. Of course, every country has their own bank regulation rules and so on. I
Yeah.
mean, that
Also,
are
it's
different.
trust minimization. Like if you just are able to pay me and we split 10% to
Hmm.
whoever is making that transaction or has connected us, for example,
Yeah,
and that is guaranteed, then
yeah,
I don't need to trust the parties involved.
exactly,
And I
exactly.
still get the benefits you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people sort of jump to this. They say like, oh, in my country, I have app A that does the exact same thing, and it's like, yeah, you
Yeah.
do, but that's you can't open that app in Africa somewhere and get the exact same payment through it, right? And I think that
Exactly.
they're missing that point a lot of the time. So I mean,
Have you been to the US? Have you tried on a college campus to send around money? I have no access to Venmo or
oh
Cash App.
really? Oh no, I haven't. I haven't tried specifically that in that scenario, but no,
Yeah,
no.
no, that's just the example I came up with because a mate of mine is on exchange in the US,
Right.
and well, we in Europe use PayPal. Switzerland uses Twint. Like
Yep.
I study in Zurich right now,
Hmm.
um, and in Zurich I am the outsider if I don't chill with and hang with
Hmm.
the Germans
Yep.
or anyone not Swiss, because they then are able to use PayPal, while the
Right.
Swiss have their own system
Right.
called Twint, which is basically PayPal but just for Swiss people.
Yeah.
You need a Swiss phone number to log
Yeah.
in.
We have the same in the Netherlands. It's called Tiki here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just make a good L2 payment app that sends it on, say, Base, Polygon, any layer 2 that is cheap for payments, and you screw them all. The only problem you have now is regulation, and that's why
Yep.
you can't do it. The only
Exactly.
way you could do it is what we discussed earlier, being the dev who just open sources it all has no control over it anymore, lets it run as its own monster, and the only thing he does is have the smart contracts have a programmed 0.01% fee, because that is what is economically viable. If he does
Yeah.
1%, the code will get copied, and we will just use the
Yeah.
1%.
We've seen that before.
Yep. Royalties, NFTs, anyone?
Yeah.
And then he will make a good one. Or the clients, like the best client developer, will just add a little fee. That's what happens on Arweave. Like the
Yeah.
client developers, they add a little fee to collect as the best client developer. So if you make the best mobile app for people in Netherlands to use that system, you collect a little fee. If
Yeah.
you're the best one in Germany, you collect a little fee. So if there's one that has the best app globally, you collect all the fees. This
Yeah.
is kind of how I imagine it. But for that, we go back to the make blockchain easier with account abstraction, so that people can actually now use that payment system and get their funds onto blockchain, because we don't
Definitely.
have our euros
Yeah,
on
yeah. The
blockchain.
off
Yeah,
ramping has a long way to go as well, right? I mean, yeah,
yeah,
I still hear stories about people getting blocked on off ramping. So it's
yep,
yeah,
yep. Just search Coinbase account blocked or
yeah,
Binance account blocked on
exactly.
Twitter,
Yeah.
and you'll have fun. Awesome, mate. For just one thing to close. If you had an executive or C-suite people, board member, any kind of non-technical person come up to you and say, "What's the best way to look into the whole stuff we discussed, kind of like the blockchain world? What's your favorite resource or guides you would have them look at?"
I think, as weird as this sounds, I think, I think answering something like jumping into Farcaster and all that sort of stuff is not going to be like, that's sort of on the other end, right? Farcaster is this fantastic environment, but it's mostly developers and sort of memers at this point. So I think that you
VCs as well.
you step towards this idea of getting into something like Farcaster to really get immersed. But I'd actually say Bloomberg is probably the first step. I think that what Bloomberg are doing lately,
Ooh,
they have their own
interesting.
crypto news section. They have like a blockchain section that they have on every week as well. They also, I mean, I watch it every morning, and they also talk a lot about cryptocurrency and what's happening in the blockchain space in general. They do keep those two things quite divided as well, which is good. But oh, you there? You're back.
Yeah.
There we go.
So yeah, they keep it kind of
Yeah, they keep it kind of divided, and so I think just in generally, I think LinkedIn is fantastic to see sort of what's happening. A lot of the even I've seen companies on there that are sort of blockchain specific companies on LinkedIn now, sort of giving a professional presentation of what they're doing and keeping that very relatable, and making that bridge for the C-suite not too far. Right, it feels familiar, it feels relatable. I think the Ethereum Foundation are on there as well. So I think that's the first step, just to really learn more about what's happening in that space, and then sort of course, bridging that over into understanding foundational information. I think DeFi is one of the sort of the things that C-suite folks will come across first. Like I hear about DeFi, what's happening in DeFi, because that sort of is an emerging piece. But I wouldn't say that the lessons learned from there are things that we should take away and incorporate into our overall sort of sense of whether or not this is good or bad, because there's a lot of interesting things that happen in DeFi as it's very early. But yeah, I think just expanding the network naturally. I think along the lines of Bloomberg, and then into Twitter, and then into Farcaster eventually, to sort of really get immersed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing and for hopping on.
No worries. Appreciate your time. Thanks for having me, Samuel. Appreciate it.
Awesome. I'll put your Farcaster in the at the bottom so people can join that network and ask you questions as well.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, and thanks for your time. And looking forward to chatting again. In the future.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and thanks for the guests for coming on to Techsuite for the C-suite. In the description below, or the show notes, whatever you want to call them, you will find the awesome resources our guests mentioned to get you started. You can find links to our guests, and you all can also find a summary, takeaways, and other links to keep connected with the show. Thank you so much for listening. Have an awesome day.